Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Craig. I am the publisher here at Hidden Timber Books, and I want to welcome you to another of our small press author reading events. Tonight, we will be honored to speak with Carly Israel about her memoir, Seconds and Inches. And what I always like to do, if you've been at these readings before, is kind of give you a bit of a bonus before we get started. And because this reading is about memoir, I want to share with you just a couple of things quick. If you're not familiar with it, Creative Nonfiction is a wonderful literary journal that is great for writers and readers. It's a great journal about craft, as well as it has personal essays throughout. And there's one particular essay this month, because it's specifically on memoir, that is by a woman named Beth Kephart, and she titles it Honoring the Seams, the Memoir in Pieces. And she writes about the art of building a memoir through snippets of our life and putting it together like a puzzle. And I'll just read one quick quote. It says, "What if we allow our writing to reflect the fragmented nature of life itself? What if we decide that the whole is not just bigger than the parts, but also that it may be more finally true for having been assembled in pieces?" So it's a really cool essay. And she actually has her own memoir coming up, which is published by Forest Avenue Press. They're another small press out in Oregon. And I've just read snippets of this book. It's a beautiful memoir as well. So things to take a look at and explore later. But now I would like to introduce you to Carly Israel. And a little bit about Carly. She is the founder of the podcast North Star Big Book. She's written about parenting, divorce, and recovery for the Huffington Post. She's also host of the podcast In Your Corner and is a relationship divorce coach. Her memoir tells the story of a child of alcoholics and a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, her own struggles with addiction, and her journey to healing. So thank you again, Carly, for being here, and I will pass the baton to you.
Thank you for having this. I'm honored and excited, and thank you for everyone who's joining in from near and far. I'm very grateful. So I've got two readings I'm going to do tonight. The first one I'm going to do, and then we're going to do Q&A, and then we'll do another one. This, my memoir, Seconds and Inches, is about generational trauma, about where we come from matters, and we carry with us what everyone else before us had experienced, and then our own becoming. And this is from chapter 5, and it's called The House on Channing. Papa Bernie, who came home a war hero and quietly hid away all medals and signs of military life, never to be discussed, was about to experience his own Holocaust. Grandma Jerry had a whiskey laugh and green, sparkly eyes, both of which she passed on to me. Her hair color changed like the Cleveland weather as she went about mothering 3 young boys, one after another. First came Mark, then my father, Alan, and then, a few years later, their youngest son, Evan. Papa Bernie was a workaholic, and Grandma Jerry was a homemaker. They lived at 2419 Channing Road in University Heights, Ohio, with their 3 boys, and then finally a baby girl, Marcy. These were the days of fancy parties at the house and drinks after work and mothers in heels. On the evening of December 24th, 1959, Grandma Jerry was at her makeup table, hair in curlers, hors d'oeuvres in the oven, punch bowl on the buffet table. 10-year-old Mark and 8-year-old Alan were at a sleepover, so they wouldn't be bored staying upstairs during the holiday party. I imagine 5-year-old Evan and 2-year-old Marcy were freshly bathed in their footy pajamas, hair combed and tucked into bed. They shared a room with Evan's twin bed next to his world globe and Marcy's white wooden crib in the corner. Bernie, an outgoing salesman, and Jerry, a social butterfly, loved to entertain, and the house was packed with friends and music and cigarette smoke and holiday cheer. The party went on just past midnight while their 2 youngest slept quietly in the room above the tar roof at the back of the house. At 4:14 a.m., a neighbor walking his dog called the University Heights Fire Department. The report reads, on arrival, found entire backroom den involved by fire and house completely charged with smoke. raised ladder to the south wall of the back bedroom, but could not make an entrance because of heat and smoke. Raised ladder to front bedroom to rescue man calling for help. In the process of getting on the ladder, he got on before ladder was set, causing the ladder to fall sideways, carrying him with it. A woman jumped from other front bedroom window before our arrival. 2 adults were taken to suburban hospital by police ambulance. Proceeded with the search for children behind 2.5-inch and 1.5-inch hose lines, laid into the house and up the stairway to the second floor. As Grandma Jerry told me on the plane ride to California, she and Papa Bernie woke to an incredible heat and smoke in their master bedroom. Bernie sent Jerry out by the window while he went to rescue Evan and Marcy. It was later stated in the report that my papa was seen wandering the hallway trying to get to his children, but was overcome by smoke and was in a confused state. He was found calling for help by the third floor window. When the firefighters lined up their ladder, one of the metal hooks was not yet attached when Papa Bernie grabbed it and swung his body to escape the flames. The ladder fell backward and on top of his chest. He was found unconscious. Grandma Jerry was seen shouting in her bathrobe at the neighbors below who were trying to alert the firemen that there were 4 children inside. Grandma Jerry explained to me that she kept shouting, "There's only 2." But no one believed her because the neighbors did not know that Mark and my father had slept out. During the commotion, she fell from the window and landed on the cement front steps, cracking her head open. She too was found unconscious, her body splayed in an unnatural position. Chapter 6, Big Brother. Jerry was somewhat of a spectacle in town with her 3 boys all lined up behind her at the grocery store and the butcher. But when baby Marcy came, all the onlookers stopped asking her when she would go for the girl. She finally had her little girl. Evan and Marcy were only 2 years apart. They roomed together, played together, and were often grouped together as the little kids. Evan took his role as Marcy's big brother very seriously, making sure she always had someone to catch her at the bottom of their slide and making sure she got a turn when the older brothers were playing in the yard. All of the boys were enamored of their little sister, but there was a special closeness between Evan and Marcy. That evening, they were the only kids in the house. Their big brothers were sleeping out and they were tucked into their beds and told to stay upstairs while Mommy and Daddy had their friends over. They could hear the laughter and music. They could smell cigarette smoke mixed with their mother's famous chocolate chip mandel bread. The 2 had fallen asleep well before the party had ended, but were startled awake by the raging fire outside their bedroom window. Marcy and Evan's room was directly above the addition with the new heater and recently tarred roof. Evan woke to Marcy's crying. Normally, he rolled over and plugged his ears because he knew his mommy was coming to get her before she woke the big brothers. But this time, something was different. There was heat and orange light, and their mommy never came. And Marcy's cries grew more frantic. Evan pulled the striped covers back from his twin bed and crept, barefooted to Marcy's white spindle crib. Her cries were frightening, and she was calling his name, Evie, 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 as she held onto the bars with her chubby 2-year-old hands. He grabbed the bars on the side of her crib and put his little naked feet in between each bar so he could pull himself up and over the top. Marcy reached for her brother, and the 2 lay like spoons as Evan covered his ear with one hand and her outside ear with the other to soften the roaring. Evan couldn't find Marcy's milk bottle or her pacifier. He just held her and cried, "Mommy's coming, Mommy's coming," until they passed out together from the fumes and smoke. When the firemen got to Evan and Marcy's rooms, they did not find anyone in the twin bed. The covers had been pulled back, but no child lay sleeping. They found the 5-year-old boy with his baby sister in her crib. The report stated that the window of the bedroom where the 2 children were found was so hot that the firefighters could not approach it from the outside. The captain wrote in the incident report, "I responded to the alarm in engine number 1 with 4 firemen. As we turned onto Channing Road, I saw a red glow in the sky, traveling south on Channing Road. I thought the fire was in the house on the southeast corner of the intersection of Channing Road and Hillbrook Road. The house looked like it was burning from the first floor through the second floor. There was one picture in particular in the file that was breathtakingly terrifying. It was of the zoomed out view of the bedroom where Marcy and Evan were found. There is a white crib on the left, a nightstand and a twin bed on the right with striped covers pulled back. The window above the twin bed is broken. There is a firefighter standing in the middle of the room, holding a flashlight, staring at the crib. A dolly lies inside. There is a baby bottle on the floor under the crib. Did it fall while she was sleeping? Did she get to drink all of her milk? The firefighter's profile is in shadow, and he is in uniform. Both children were found unconscious, and their limp bodies were passed from fireman to fireman. There were 2 resuscitators on the fire trucks, and men worked on each little child as they laid them on the blankets set up on the driveway. There were 2 resuscitators, but only one worked that evening. As fate would have it, Evan got the working one. As a result of smoke inhalation, Marcy Israel, aged 2.5 years, was dead on arrival at the hospital. Evan Israel, aged 5, was confined in the hospital in serious condition. His parents, Bernard, age 35, and Geraldine, age 33, were confined in the hospital with bruises and smoke inhalation on Thursday, December 25th, 1959. And this is the picture that I found. If you can see it, it's black and white, so it's hard, but this was in the file when I went to the fire station.
Wow. So, goodness, when you reached out to do that kind of research, did you what did you anticipate that you might find, or were you surprised? Were you more shocked? Were things confirmed for you? Like sometimes we seek to find the pieces of the puzzle for ourselves, and then when we get them, we're like, whoa, that's not where I anticipated I was headed, or yep, I just needed to know for my own self. So I'm curious.
Yeah, so great question. My grandmother told me about the fire when I was 12, which is another chapter in the book, on a plane ride to California, and I never knew. My middle name was named after her, and I didn't even know that she existed until I was 12. And she told me the entire story, detail for detail, of what I wrote in here. And when I waited until she died because I was not comfortable writing the story while she was alive, even though she specifically asked me to write it on a number of occasions, because I knew that in order for me to really tell it, I had to tell all of it. And I was terrified of her having to read it, even though she wanted it told. And so my oldest son and I went to the fire department, which I passed all the time. It's like 15 minutes from my house, across the street from Bialy's Bagels, if you're a Clevelander. And I went to the university fire department, and there's this young fireman, and I knocked on the door. It was winter. And I said, can I come in? And we explained the story, and I didn't know the address. I knew it was Channing Road. We always knew that. I knew that it was around Christmas time. They had a holiday party, even though we're Jewish, they must have had like clients and stuff. And I knew that, I knew the year. And I told them as many details as I could tell them. And I gave them my information. They said there's bad news because there was a flood in the room where they keep all the records, and that they would let me know if they found anything. We went to the movies. I got a text message from the fire department saying we found everything. Please come here as soon as you can. And the file was like 1.5 inches thick with pictures. Like, when they have to take pictures of the scene, and they were pretty graphic. And they gave me a copy of every single report. So that's how I ended up creating the story. Was I literally wrote down, I followed it to, and what was the most interesting thing, he said, the firefighter, every single detail you told me was true except for the cause of the fire. And it'd been 59 years. And for 59 years, my grandma, my grandfather, and all of their friends thought that the fire was caused by a cigarette that was left on a couch. And so you can imagine if you were in a group of friends and a little girl was killed because of a fire, and all of you are smoking, and everyone's whispering who was leaving that cigarette, that there must have been so much guilt. I mean, they all died eventually of old age, and no one knew that the fire was not from a cigarette. It was from a heater. And that was what was in the report, but I'm certain that my grandparents were not worrying about investigation when that was happening because they were in the middle of hell. My uncle ended up being in a coma for 6 months and they lost their house and their daughter. So, but what was so like crazy was the entire cause of the fire that everyone knew. And if I wouldn't have gone there and found that, nobody would have known that. And that was pretty eye-opening.
Wow, yeah. That just goes back to the importance of telling our stories. We were talking about that before we got started tonight. Just, you know, history gets lost if we don't tell our story. And sometimes it's painful, but sometimes it's just, you know, it just helps us understand who we are and who we are in relation to the world. So I do want to allow other people, if you've got questions, if you want to make a comment about the reading just now, certainly feel free to do that. Just drop your name in the chat and we can kind of go down the list. And I just want to ask one more before, I'm not sure if I'm going to read any of this, but I wondered, you know, about the letters that you include in the book. And, you know, at first glance, they might seem like they're letters asking for forgiveness. And in some ways, I wonder if they aren't, but there's a lot more to them. And I wondered if you would just briefly give a little hint at how those letters work for your story. And then I see that Stephanie has a question.
Well, I'm so glad you asked that. I stopped where I stopped because I didn't want to take up too much time, but I would love to read one of the letters that goes directly with that story, and then I'll answer that question. So this is immediately after I just stopped, and it's to baby Marcy. Dear baby Marcy, we drive by your house on Channing often. My boys know your story, but I didn't learn about you until I was 12 on a plane to California with your parents to visit your brother, Evan. Your mom whispered every detail into my ear. It all made so much sense. Why my dad, your brother, Alan, freaked out if we played with matches or fire or candles. And I found out my original middle name was chosen in your memory, but then they changed it to Michelle instead of Marcy, because Michelle in Hebrew means life, and they didn't want me to carry what you had to endure. Your mother, my grandmother, told me she had to stop talking about you because after a while, people were so uncomfortable with that depth of grief. She told me certain days were so painful for her, like your birthday and the anniversary of your death. She told me everything. Since then, I've wondered if I look like how you would have looked, or what it would be like to have a biological aunt. But I keep your story inside and I carry it with everything else that burns. I am so sorry you did not get to live a long life. I would have loved to know you. I am a descendant of your story, and the universe whispers to me sometimes to tell it. And I have, sweet baby Marcy. You have made my life more awake. So the letters I have in there are, I wouldn't say for forgiveness, I say they're for acknowledgement. I feel like a lot of times people don't get to be acknowledged, whether it's in gratitude or just acknowledging pain or hardships that they've gone through. And I think that what made this book happen, what originally was, I did a thank you post on social media every day for a year. I made a commitment. And in the beginning, it was just saying thank you to people I really loved and how they treated me nicely. And then it started picking up where I would start thanking somebody for something dark or ugly that they showed me that I don't want to be like, or how they treated somebody, or how they behaved, or how somebody hurt me and how it made me grow. And, you know, I think the thing that's the most important is people just want to be acknowledged. And, you know, she was never able to be acknowledged. And because of the way our society deals with grief, my grandmother had to literally not talk about her. My family never spoke about her. My father, who survived and wasn't there, and his older brother were separated for 6 months from their parents and living in different houses all over Cleveland. And no one went to therapy and no one talked about it. And it was just put away, like his medals. And I feel like one of my jobs on earth is to talk about things that no one wants to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I love that idea of acknowledgement and to be seen. Stephanie, I know you had a question. You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you like.
Hi, Carly.
Hi, Stephanie. I love you.
I love you. I'm Stephanie. I'm a friend and neighbor and fellow mama with Carly.
Yeah.
I can't remember if you acknowledged it, but what was your dad's reaction to finding out that the cause of the fire was something else?
I think that it's such a great question. He was so emotionally damaged and stunted by that. I mean, it was a trauma. And I talk about it like it was their own Holocaust, right? I come from many Holocausts, and we all do, right? And because my grandfather, his father's mother, was mentally insane, and he didn't want to like get into therapy. My grandfather didn't want to have his kids in therapy, even though they lost their sister and he lost his daughter, because to him that stigma was my mom was in therapy and she was sick, and so he was never given those tools. And when I came to them and I showed them these pictures and I told them about the report, I think he just, my dad does not talk a lot about his emotions. He got teary, obviously, and I think it was hard for him to see. He read my book. He's reading my book for the first time right now. So I don't know if he's on here, but he definitely can speak to that. But it is, it's helped my relationship with him more than anything, because I was able to see him as not the dad who he is today, but as that little boy that was never given, like, me and your mothers of boys, and you can't even imagine if something that traumatic happened and then we never talked to our kid about it ever again.
Right.
So it brings up a lot of stuff, like when you start churning.
Right. And it's so interesting too, because that was the generation too. I mean, therapy was not a thing when our parents were children. So I just imagine that must have been so eye-opening.
It's like the way of life, right? So my grandfather came back. I didn't know my grandfather landed on Normandy until he died. Like, he never spoke about it. We could have been a military family. Like, we just never knew.
So interesting. Well, thank you. This is
Thank you for everything. I love you so much.
Love you too.
Carly, would you like to do another reading?
Yes, I would. Thank you guys for your kindness and patience. This one is in part 2. It's called Chapter 21, and it is called Shoeless in an Ice Storm. I am in Athens, Ohio, at Ohio University, not a place to send your children if you'd like them to not be in recovery or in treatment. And I was well into my own addiction at this point. By winter break of my sophomore year, I was trying again to be sober and failing, but I was crazy when I was drunk or high and crazy when I was sober. Nothing worked. I thought going away would help. So Theo and I decided to go on another road trip to Florida, which we'd done the previous winter break. I made him promise not to drink or use if we went because I was trying to stay sober. But as soon as we hit the road, out came his pipe and up to my mouth it went. Then I had to move the line I had drawn in the sand and draw a new one. I announced, I'm only going to get high on this trip. We came back to Athens for New Year's, and I was ready to follow through on my promise of Ohio sobriety. But I was suffering and spiritless and despised everyone around me. So I decided I'd stop on January 1st. Only I don't remember anything else until January 20th. On the weekend of the 20th, there was an ice storm in Athens, and all the bars and stores were closed. I couldn't get any alcohol or get out of the house to get drugs, and I lost it. I felt something crack in my sanity, and I wanted off the planet. I called a Blennis hospital to check myself in because I didn't feel safe on my own anymore. I knew I was falling apart, and I knew I would do something dangerous if I didn't get help. But no one answered the phone. I left the apartment in the middle of the night without boots or a coat and wandered the streets looking for something. Chapter 22. If you want it, come and get it. While walking the streets at night in an ice storm, somehow freezing and hot at the same time, I thought about Grace. I'd done a 4-show black box production with a dynamic group of artists. Grace was one of the directors. One night during the production, when we were downing drinks at an after party, I noticed that she wasn't. I asked her why she wasn't drinking, and she told me she was sober. I filed that away. She had so much confidence and strength, and she owned whatever space she was in. I spent my time rehearsing lines on the floor on my back because I was usually too hungover from the night before to stand. I needed to call Grace. I needed help, and there was no one else I could ask. I needed her to tell me what to do. When I got to my apartment, frozen and panicked, I called her. Her phone rang and rang. I knew if she didn't pick up, I would not have the courage to call her in the morning. As soon as she picked up, the tears came. There weren't words for what I was feeling, so I just sobbed and wailed. She told me to breathe and gave me an address to meet her at the next morning. We met at a coffee shop near the theater building. I showed up early, smoked cigarette after cigarette, and downed coffee as I waited for her at a corner booth. When she walked in and sat down across from me, I blurted out, "I'm a mess. I don't know what's going on. I need help." She paused in removing her coat and frowned. Her eyes were clear sky and hope. She finished removing her coat and put her hand on mine and said, "I'm here." I told her how much I'd been using and how I tried to stop and how it made it worse, and I asked, "Do you think I'm an addict or alcoholic?" "Sweetie, I can't tell you that. That's a question you're going to have to figure out on your own." I crumpled onto the table and put my face in my hands. "There's a meeting I go to across the street at 6. You can come with me if you want. I'm heading there now." She wasn't going to make this easy. A meeting? I couldn't believe I needed a meeting. But I nodded and put my hoodie over my head to hide in case anyone knew me there. I followed her across the street at a bit of a distance. I was going to my first meeting. My first meeting. I'd been to many meetings before, but they were for my parents. This would be my first meeting for me. But the way Grace invited me seemed like it was of no consequence to her if I came with her or not. And the way she confidently held herself and the way she didn't seem to need anyone to make her okay, it was all so attractive to me. I just had no idea how I could get from where I was to the other planet she lived on. The meeting was bright and fluorescent in the church conference room. There was nowhere to hide. The styrofoam coffee cups and the smiling faces of mostly middle-aged townies told me what I needed to know. I didn't belong. Everyone knew Grace. She seemed like a celebrity. Someone handed me a blue book that a bunch of people I didn't know wrote their names in and phone numbers. Someone even wrote "Perfect Child of God." Someone gave me what looked like a list of rules to read aloud, and I read it. People spoke in turns, but I didn't hear a single word. By the time the meeting was over, everyone was talking and laughing, and I was heading out for the exit. Grace had asked me if I had plans after, and I lied, and I told her I did. I wanted to get the hell away from there. I went home, threw the book on the coffee table, and called my mom. "Mom, I went to a meeting." Chapter 23, I can't do this. I went to a meeting every night for the next 5 nights. I'd arrive at the meeting as it was starting so I could avoid talking to anyone, sit in the back of the room, eat Chinese takeout during the meeting, and run for the door the second they were done with their circle prayer, waving and smiling as they called my name. I would go home and get dressed and wait to go out. I would go to a party or a bar and tell everyone I was sober. No one believed me or took me seriously. I told all of my professors and the few friends I had left that I was sober. I told Theo we couldn't use drugs or alcohol in the apartment anymore, but he didn't listen. The novelty of being sober and clear-headed wore off fast. I was so uncomfortable, and I hated the meetings where they said the same irrelevant refrigerator magnet cliches every night. I could barely sleep because of the nightmares, and I felt so isolated. Theo was rarely home anymore. He started seeing someone from one of his classes. I hadn't put a drug or drop of alcohol in my body for 6 days, and it felt like the underside of my skin was sandpaper. My chest was about to ignite into flames, and no one understood how intolerable it was. My mom was the only person who seemed supportive and happy if I was sober, but if this was sober, I couldn't do it. But when I got high again, it didn't work. I no longer felt free. Instead, I felt like I was being chased by demons and there was no way to escape them, no matter how much I drank or used. Theo told me he was going on a date. He told me that he really liked her. I had bought tickets to a show at the Swindlefish before I had gotten sober 6 days earlier, and I didn't want to waste the $12, so I invited the roommate of the girl Theo was going on a date with to join me. That night at her apartment, my show companion and a friend of hers were getting high before the show and offered me a hit, but I turned them down at first. I'd made it through the past 6 nights as a newly sober person, and I did not want to ruin my streak. I didn't feel satisfied or proud of myself for saying no, though. I felt trapped and like a fraud. We walked the 3 blocks to the bar. Court Street, the main street where we both lived, was mostly populated with bars from one end to the other, with a few music stores and banks in between. I couldn't stop staring at the empty booze bottles by the curb of each bar. The people at the meeting had told me not to drink, even though I thought my only problem was with drugs. But that night, my mouth watered for any tiny amount of booze and backwash at the bottom of those empty bottles. I contemplated it as I was walking between these roommates of Theo's date and her friend. I would be willing to take their heads and crack them together if it meant I could grab those bottles and suck every last drop from the bottoms. 6 days without anything in my body, and all I wanted was a strong drink. We arrived at the bar, and I saw the bartender that I had convinced to hook up with me, and even though he told me he had a girlfriend in another college, he didn't seem like he wanted to see me, and I felt his disgust as he nodded at me and looked away. I made my way through the crowd of laughing, hippie, punk college students to the bathroom. I was wearing my favorite sky blue tank top, and I looked at my body in the mirror. I realized I was finally as emaciated as I wanted to be. Finally, my body was acceptable, but when I caught the reflection of my eyes, I saw a girl who would not make it to 20. And this is the last chapter. Chapter 24, The Darkest Night. Back home, I changed out of the tight bar clothes and put on a flannel shirt and baggy shorts. I slid my Sarah McLachlan CD in and hit repeat, turning it up as loud as it would go. The pain inside was unbearable. I could hardly breathe. I opened up that blue book they gave me at the first meeting, and I saw those names and numbers. Some had even written, "Call me anytime." But it was 1:30 a.m., and they probably wouldn't even remember who I was. I had only gone to a few meetings. Instead, I called my brother in Cleveland to ask him for help, but he didn't seem to understand what I was saying. After a few minutes, I told him I had better go. Even though I had begged Theo to hide our drugs in pipes, I saw a packed bowl on the table, and there was a bottle of vodka in the freezer. I smoked one cigarette after the next, lighting one with the last. I cried and clenched my fist. I turned Sarah up even louder. I wanted out. My mind was wild. I heard Theo come home from his date. Without a thought, without saying a word, I pushed past him and slammed the bathroom door shut. There was no sound in the bathroom. He had shut off the CD player, and all I could hear was the echo of our toiletries as I threw brushes and gel aside. I do not remember having a plan. I just remember feeling like a caged animal. I found the ephedrine pills, the kind of speed they sell truck drivers, and poured the entire bottle into my mouth and swallowed them without water from the running faucet. I turned toward the medicine cabinet. I grabbed bottle after bottle of pills and poured them into my mouth too. I looked at the pills, threw them back in my mouth, and leaned over the sink to get more water. I took bottles of prescription pills without reading the labels, a bottle of Aleve, a bottle of Tylenol. I looked at myself in the mirror as I emptied that last bottle into my mouth. I felt like a burglar who'd torn apart the bathroom. I gripped the edge of the sink and lowered myself down onto the bathroom rug. I closed my eyes. Everything got really quiet. Down on the red shag rug of the bathroom floor, I waited to die. I couldn't breathe. I curled myself into a ball and hugged my legs and started to sob. I knew what I had done. I accepted it. It was what I wanted. I knew the amount I took, and I knew the combination would do what I needed it to do. I wanted it to be done. I didn't want to do this anymore. I made my choice. I was done. As I lay on the bathroom floor, slowly dying, I heard a voice. It said my name. It was a man's voice, and it said, "Get up or you're going to die." After a few more moments, I heard it again. "Carly, call Theo's name and ask for help. You have to ask for help." The voice was insistent. I was so ashamed, but I heard this forceful voice, and it was so definite. I quietly called for Theo through the bathroom door, but he couldn't hear me. I called again and again until my voice was loud enough for him to come in. He opened the door and saw me on the floor. The water was running, and he saw the empty bottles in the sink. "What did you do? What did you do?" He was hysterically crying. I had never seen him cry this way, and I stared mesmerized. He pulled me up, dragged me to the living room, and laid me on the futon and called 911. He kept yelling and wailing, "Why did you do this? Why did you do this?" I remember his swollen red face floating in front of me. For once, I had nothing to say. When I looked up next, the police were there asking me questions. I put my hands over my ears and closed my eyes. The paramedics came and loaded me into an ambulance. The lights were flashing and people had gathered on the street to watch. The upside-down face of a woman loomed over me in the ambulance as the door slammed shut. "You're so stupid," she said, shaking her head.
You give us a lot of details into your personal life, and I know you do that in a way just from reading a little bit about your bio and and even the introduction to your story and even the ending. You do that in a way to provide connection for those who probably are afraid to share their story. I wonder, you know, after you tell us this journey, and you know, towards the end of the book, you have this whole chapter on lessons learned, and it's a great chapter. I'm just curious if there's several different lessons, and I'm curious if there's one that you return to often. You know, now that you've written the book, you're looking back, you're in a much different place than you were in your 20s, a much different place than you were even writing the book. Is there still a lesson that you keep going back to?
So many. But I think the one that sticks out the most is I made a decision to end my life. It wasn't like I was suicidal. I actually tried to end my life, and I did it. I told God and the universe I was done. And I believe that that my God had a different plan for me. And I call everything after that night my bonus life, but I forget it every single day. And so every single day when I'm worried about money or career or kids or COVID or life or family or people being upset or social media or whatever it is I'm worried about, I forget that all of this is a bonus life, and that I couldn't see what I couldn't see. And to me, it seemed like the only way out. And I have a different connection with people who are suicidal, who have been there, that I would never have known had I not gone through that. And, you know, I was listening to one of the many musicians who killed themselves recently, and hearing like his deep, rich voice and being like, you could have just gotten through that part, that really hard part where you thought it was never going to get better, because we all have those parts, right? Maybe not to the depths, but we all experience them. And we don't talk about it enough, so people don't realize like that other people feel like this, and it's not anything to be ashamed of. And while I know that suicide is selfish, to me at that point in time, what my brain told me was that even though it was going to cause tremendous pain to my family, that I was causing them tremendous pain currently with my emotional and my alcoholism and my money and everything. And my brain told me they would be better off. Now, it makes me want to cry because I'm a mother of 3 kids, and the idea of one of my kids thinking that they would be better, you know, and I know my mom and my dad, we talk about it all the time, that the anniversary of January 27th could have been the anniversary that they had to not celebrate, like, you know, commemorate when their daughter died. And for me, it really was seconds and inches. I mean, the doctor brought in the bag that the police collected, and they said, if it would have been 15 minutes later, there's no way we would have been able to revive you. And so the lesson I would say is that none of the things I think are a big deal are a big deal.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you.
I know that, Kenrine, I hope I'm saying your name correct. You've got a question as well.
Yeah, so most of you probably don't know me, but I am a first-year music therapy student at Cleveland State University. So basically everything that Carly's talking about hits pretty close to home, since my field is pretty much like all mental health, psychological wellness, behavioral wellness, and stuff like that. So when you mentioned when you were at OU going to see your friend, and you pretty much like walked up to her and you just started bursting out in tears, I feel like that is very common for many young people who don't necessarily know how to express their emotions. And like, speaking from a music therapy standpoint, like I'm glad at least these days there are ways to help people get their emotions out. And as a current music therapy student, I would 100% advocate the use of music therapy in that instance, maybe like, you know, through a song or whatnot that could trigger some emotions or trigger some hopefully happy memories that would help you through those type of moments. And then the other thing, when you were reading through the very last chapter of your suicide attempt, that again hits rather close to home for me, not me personally, but one of my classmates actually did something very similar. And I just automatically thought of her while you were reading through that. Like I think it's really sad that young people even have these types of intentions and thoughts, but I'm also very grateful for the fact that at least there are many therapy options available. And part of why I went into music therapy was so I could be able to help people who may be having these types of thoughts and whatnot.
Thank you for what you're doing. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I think, you know, that's just a reminder of how when we feel hopeless, we feel so alone, and how much we're missing community, especially now. You know, we're also isolated at home. We can't really go anywhere, but for whatever reason, whether you're in that place emotionally or physically or isolated, community is so important. And it's another reason why sharing your story is so important, to just offer those connections, and someone takes them, maybe they don't take them, but it's there.
I wanted to share something really cool that happened. So 2 weeks ago, my husband and I were staying at a really cool camping place about half an hour from my college campus, and I had not been back in 20 years. And I said I was ready to go back because my book was coming out like the next day, and I felt like I was ready to like face that place. And I basically took my husband like on a tour of like all of those haunts. We climbed the stairs to my apartment. We stood outside the door where I tried taking my own life, and I actually knocked on the door, but because of COVID, a lot of people aren't there. But I said to him, literally on the other side of the door is a hallway, and that's the bathroom. And we went to the place where I met Grace, and I showed him all of that. And what was really interesting was I've always been interested since doing the memoir of finding records, like facts that support the stories, because a lot of people are always like, well, how do you know that's real? And so I reached out to the Athens Police Department, and through an awesome series, Twist of Fate, they had my records and they found them really easily. And I was like, I'll come pick them up. And they're like, we'll email them to you right now. And so 21 years later, I get an attachment of the police record, and it was in my inbox, and I opened it up and I was scared to read it. And at the top, the subject said suicide. And I read the notes, and obviously a police report's not written with a lot of emotion. It's just facts, which is really, really interesting because all of my stuff is emotion, and then you mix it. And I saw this name, and it said P.O. Shane Hartley. And that was the person, the police officer that came to my apartment. And I'm sure I was not the only person who overdosed in Athens, Ohio. But there was this thought in my mind, because I've been doing all these letters, that I wonder if I could find that person and say thank you. And I've told this story hundreds of times because I'm sober in AA and I talk about this part of my story. I've never once considered the police officer that had to come into my apartment. And I sent an email back to the person who helped me find the records, and she said, he's no longer here. It's been 21 years, but if I can find him, I'll let you know. A couple hours later, I get an email. She's so excited. He is serving in our military, deployed in another country, fighting for our country. And in the email chain is an email from P.O. Shane Hartley, who said that he has never once gotten anyone telling him thank you. And that what a story. And I sent him the report. I sent him a picture of what I looked like right before I killed myself, and what I look like today with my 3 children that would not be alive if it wasn't for him. And we sent him a copy of my book. And he just really made a big deal and was like, you have no idea what you taking the time means to me. And that is like the message I keep getting, is we don't take time to tell people when somebody is doing something awesome. We are willing to tell anyone when they're doing something wrong. But when we take the time and say, I just want you to know that you're really kind to me every time I see you, and it really makes my heart feel good. That little message can change someone's life. And my responsibility is to remain open to those messages and those seconds and inches that can shift someone's way that they look at things.
Yeah, that's a very cool story. And that just goes back again to what you said earlier about the letters. Those are just letters of acknowledgement, you know, that I see you, I remember you, I appreciate you. And yeah, very cool. I know that outside of writing this memoir, you have a couple of different podcasts that you run. So I wonder how those two things work together. You know, I imagine they both are part of sharing your story, making connections. But do you find that one, how do they translate into your life, I guess, or, you know,
Right.
how do you work them?
So the North Star Big Book is just, I've been taking women through, the Big Book is our text. It's our sobriety text that we study in order to get better. It's like where our program is laid out. I've been taking women through the book for 20 plus years, and it got to a place where all the people I was working with were living in different places, and they're like, could you just record this? And I was like, why not? And so I recorded it, 44 episodes, me taking the listener through the book, and it's grown and grown. There's like 25,000 downloads, and it's free, obviously, and I would never charge anything for it. And it's now we're doing a really cool thing where I'm having people I don't know or know in sobriety kind of take me through their favorite part of the book to make it come alive for people, because it saved my life. But the podcast I'm doing now that I'm really excited about is called In Your Corner Divorce, because through all this work and through writing my book, I finally figured out what I want to do, because I'm like the kid who's 41 who still didn't know what they wanted to do. And I was like, I want to be a divorce coach. I want to help people through this dark time that society writes as this horrible thing. And I want to change the way that divorce is looked at in our world and make it so there's not generational trauma because two people couldn't stay married. And I want to teach people how they can make really clear, smart choices to not mess up their kids. And so my podcast is all about that. And I'm really excited, and I can see the little ripples. And I personally think it could change the world, because I talk to adult children of divorce and children in divorce, and I get anonymous letters and questionnaires, and there is pain that transfers not just to the child, but it transfers to whoever that child grows up to be in relationships with and their children. And if we don't, hurt people. And so the only reason why divorced families today are a mess is because there's two selfish people involved that are not willing to put their stuff aside and take care of the kids and not make it about them. And that's what I'm doing now. So I'm excited about that.
That's great.
Thank you.
I
have a question.
Yes.
On there are my mom and dad. Well, let's ask my dad that question about what it was like to hear about the fire.
The heater instead of the. It was, on Alan, it was quite a shock that she got pictures from the fire department, showed them to me. The first time I saw the pictures, remember at 8 years old, I went in the house, but they only took me into one bedroom that was smoke filled, and I never saw my sister's and brother's room where she died. And it was quite shocking, and I was led to believe all these years that it was somebody smoking and had a cigarette in a couch, and turned out that it was totally wrong, and it was quite eye-opening. And now unfortunately that memory of what I see that room now sticks with me, but it is what it is, and the truth, and it's nice to know exactly what happened, and it's opened the door to ask other questions, and so is Carly's book.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. I love you.
I love you too.
Mm-hmm. My cousin from London, England is on. Diane, she has a question I think I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually calling from Liverpool, where it's nearly 1
sorry,
o'clock.
I apologize.
But I just want to ask you, Carly, from the time you decided to write the memoir till the time you put the final full stop, how long was the process?
From January until October.
That's quick.
Yeah, so I wrote it in my head for 2 decades or 3 decades, and then my publisher said, I want you to turn this into a book. And I wrote like a cute little thing, like a holiday gift book of thank yous. And she's like, no, there's more stories in here. And she pushed me really, she would not give me a contract until I wrote it really like the deep. She said to me, I want you to write in a way that makes you uncomfortable and vulnerable. And I was like, okay. And so that she gave me 6 weeks to turn what she wanted it to become into a real first draft. And then after those 6 weeks, I literally canceled everything. I have one night a week where I don't have my children from 6 o'clock until bedtime. And I was just like, I can't talk to anybody. And I would just write next to my dog and write and get it all out. And I have papers everywhere. And then I turned it into her, and she wrote back to me and she's like, we want you. And then there was a couple of months in between of nothing. And then the editor was like, here, do something with this. And then I had a couple more months and it was over.
I found it a very emotional book.
Thank you. Thank you from Liverpool. I love you.
I love you too. Can I go to bed now?
Yes, go to bed. It's night-night time.
Thank you so much for being here, Diane.
You're welcome.
Well, it is 6:52, so we're nearing the end of our hour. I did want to ask you, Carly, about what you have in store next for your readers. That you've got this memoir out of the way. Where would you like to go next?
Good question. Well, I didn't think there was going to be a next. I was like, one and done, we're good. But when you have a certain gift and you're supposed to be doing something with it, the universe lets you know. So I want Matt Cohn to answer this. So I'm going to do this quickly. So I have another book that's going to come, and it's going to be about life lessons. And each chapter is going to be a story of a different person that I work with. And I get to tell other people's stories. But I want to hear what my old friend Matt has to say.
It's like we're kind of locked in time. When I graduated high school, it's like when we
I know.
You're like always that, that girl in my sister's grade. Mm-hmm. It is so great to see you. It's fascinating to hear your story. You think that you know someone, or you think that you know what's going on in people's lives because of Facebook, and everyone's happy and doing their thing, and you don't realize the pain that they may be feeling. And that's what drew me to this, is like, wow, I see these people and I think everyone that graduated from Beechwood, they're all doing great and they're successful, and and that's not quite the reality. What fascinates me is that you had courage to tell a story that I imagine was very difficult for your family. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't even imagine writing that book right now with my family dynamics and what explosions would come from this. I don't know about healing, but I think it would kind of open up a really difficult space. So I'm curious to know, how has that affected your family dynamics? I mean, you're opening up some real harsh realities. Yeah. That even dating all the way back to the fire with your grandparents already created a spark of dysfunction. I'm a child of a mother of my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and you have that, and even generations later, that dysfunction, that poison still finds its way in. And so I think it really does. You're like putting a stop to it. Yeah. In a fascinating way. So I'm just kind of curious, I guess, since your parents are sitting here, I'd be. Yeah,
and my grandma, Lulu's on here too. My Holocaust survivor grandmother. Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you first of all, thank you for that, and for all you do for the community. I asked my mom if she would be okay with it. She was the one I was the most worried about, because I couldn't tell my story without telling their story. And their story is a part of my story, and their alcoholism and what it was like to grow up in that house was really painful. And we have healed as a family because we're all in recovery and we do a ton of work. But it would be very hard if I didn't have her blessing. And she told me I was allowed to tell everything, because I didn't want to tell the story without being able to do that. I knew that the ancestor stories needed to be told, and I wasn't worried about telling those. That's why I waited till my other grandmother died. But my parents' story was the scariest. Once she gave me the blessing, the other story that was hard was I'm divorced, and I asked my husband if I could share with him the story, and he read it. I imagine he read it literally just looking for the parts about us, because he thought that the entire story is about us, which it's actually not at all. And he wrote me like a dissertation length paper about why I can't write the story and how it's going to cause a lot of problems and how I'm not allowed to do this. And I did a lot of praying, and I said to him, I hear what you're saying. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity that I've wanted my entire life. And if there are things that you do not want in here, please tell me and I will edit them out. And he did. He wrote me a very long list. And we co-parent really well together. He hates that this is out here, but I made sure when I wrote it and I read it and I edited, I pictured my 3 boys reading it. And would I be okay with the information they were reading, regardless of what age they are when they read it? And if I was okay with that, then I was going to be okay with how I wrote it. And like you said, I needed to release the truth. Because if I don't tell this story, there's no one else that's going to tell it, right? And you, like, you know, we have a responsibility to tell these stories. Like, since I started doing this, I found out, I got from Yad Vashem, my grandfather's card from the DP camp. Like, and you see his name changed. And we're trying to find, you know, we're in Treblinka where all the family was murdered. And it's, no one was doing that. No one was looking. And once you start opening, more starts coming. And it's really, I don't know about my family, what they have to say, but it's really, it's like beautiful to, like, you keep finding more. So permission. I changed names. You can maybe change some names.
Matt, you asked how did the family react? Was it a fireball? Was it trouble? Well, all my life, I thought my children and my grandchildren, there is nothing ever they can do that I would not love them and approve anyway. So she had no problems. She knew that I accept and love them no matter what they do, and they can always come and tell me without having to hide. So Matt, it was fun.
One of my greatest desire besides writing this book was my grandmother being alive to read it. And, you know, what an honor, because this story would never have happened without her. She is the talker. She is the storyteller of our family. I got that from her. She would tell me these stories when I was little, and for my whole life I heard them. She would tell my papa's story to me. It's opened up so much in our family because my papa, who survived, was one of 4 siblings that survived out of everyone else that was murdered. And his twin sister, Sylvia, who died, who's a big part of the first part of the book, her family didn't know her story. And her grandson came up to me today with my book in his hand, and he said, "Will you please sign this?" And I said, "What was it like reading your grandmother's story?" And he had tears in his eyes, and he said, "It was really, really hard, but I'm so glad you wrote it down, because no one would have known it." They literally didn't know the true part of her story, that she died sick from. Like, she died, her last days was tortured from her story. And we get to carry that on because it's our responsibility. And I do that with my children. Like, I'm like, look, this happened to us, and look what's happening to Black people in America, and look what's I mean, we talk about it because it's our responsibility to say something, because no one else said it for you guys.
You make such a great point, Carly. I was just thinking, you know, as you were talking, how hard society tries to squelch anybody's history that doesn't fit into some sort of norm or some sort of status quo. And one act of resistance is just writing. It's just putting those stories down, no matter what, and sharing them. And that's the power of writing. That's, you know, I'm not an activist on the front lines. I'm in the background. So, but like you, I mean, I would write someone's story down. I will do whatever I can to get that word out as a part of resistance. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we all play a role in that. So I'm so grateful that you were willing to put that down. I'm grateful to hear that you did all the things that, you know, we do when we worry about what we're writing about. You asked your family for permission. You know, you considered all that. You didn't just like throw it out there and whatever, you know, like, right. You really, and that makes it an honest, true, authentic story.
Thank you. This was so much more fulfilling than watching Netflix for an hour.
Yeah. Well, it is 7
I want to say one thing, Matt, if your congregation ever wants me and my grandmother to talk about our story, we would be honored.
They would love that.
We would love it too.
They would love it. And now with COVID,
virtual life, yeah.
Together, yeah, I just did a baby naming in.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Let's make it happen.
I'd love to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Yes, thank you for joining us in the evening. Thank you so much again, Carly and Jaded Ibis Press, for bringing your book to us. If you want to go to hiddentimberbooks.com, there are more readings coming up down the line. So I hope to see you all online again.
Yes.
And if you want to check out where to purchase Carly's book, you can go to Jaded Ibis Press, and you can just Google it. It'll come up right away. Search for her book, and you can purchase it there and support your small press, support Carly. And there is one more quick question from Jeremy.
Oh, Jeremy, tell Jeremy is an old friend from high school. I love you. I want you to know, I just got a message today from a really big addiction center. They're all purchasing my book for the staff because they want to get an inside understanding from where I was and where I became. And then if they approve of it, they're going to have all of their clients and patients read it. So I find that this is an awesome place to talk about it. And I'm obviously an open book.
So that's a great question, Jeremy. And thank you again, everyone, for being here. Have a good evening.
Be safe.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Christy.
You're welcome.
Thank you.